Welcome to week 5 of UABC's Tea Room. My name is Shirley and I'm the current president of the club. I will be your host for this week's podcast, which will be talking about the equipment we use in badminton, such as strings, rackets, shoes, and shuttles. So with me today, we have 2 past execs from our team, and as well, one of our guest speakers is calling in from Calgary. And I just want to take some time to introduce them. So the first person we have is Daniel Chu, and he used to be an exec of the team. So Daniel, you can go ahead.
Hi, I'm Daniel, and as Shirley said, I used to be the VP of the UABC. I've been playing badminton for about 10 plus years now, so about half of my life I've been playing badminton. I started out when I was really young in Hong Kong, and the stuff the equipment I use has changed a lot from when I first started until now. So I started playing in pajamas and just borrowing a racket from my uncle, and now I actually wear sports clothing. So yeah, I've been playing badminton for a while now.
Yay, congratulations, upgrade.
Yeah.
Thanks for that,
I still wear pajamas though.
Oh my gosh, no judgment here.
Just not to play.
Next person we have is also a past exec member. His name is Jonas.
Going to be this year, not because I'm graduating, but because I want to focus on my capstone for this year.
Thank you very much. And then last but not least, our guest caller from Calgary, his name is John, and he's been playing badminton for a long time.
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Jonathan, and I've been playing badminton for 10 plus years, and I've been competing on the provincial, national, and international circuit for around 6 or 7 years. So I've experienced a lot, and I feel like I have some good insight that I can help share with everybody who tuned into this great podcast.
Thank you. So before we start off as well, I just want to take some time to thank all of you guys for being able to come out for today's podcast. I know one thing that a lot of people might be wondering about in terms of equipment when they first start playing is they think about buying a racket. So in terms of buying a racket, what are kind of some of the difference in terms of, let's say, the weight balance of the rackets?
So the general rule of thumb is that the heavier racket that you're using, especially for head heavy, the harder your hits will be. Because of the heavier rackets, for some people who might not be as strong or as confident in their swings, they might find it too slow to move. And so shots they might have been able to hit before, they might find that now, because of the heavier racket, the slower timing, they're not able to hit those shots as well anymore. And generally, if that's the case, you want to go more for an even or even like a light racket, because you can swing it faster, swing it easier, and have like less of a hard time making your shots.
Yeah, one thing I would like to add is if you're just starting out, just go right in the middle, go for medium balance, and just work from there. You'll probably settle on something different, or you might not, but going right in the middle is just a good place to start.
In terms of the balancing as well, I know that there's also the possibility of rackets having different types of head shapes. Do any of you know the different head shapes and kind of like what effect that has on the playing?
So I'd say there's pretty much 2 kind of head shapes. There's like you have your regular head shape, and then you have the second one, which is where the racket's head is a bit more narrow and elongated. So with the bigger head shape, you will have an increased sweet spot. And then so pretty much what a sweet spot is when you're playing, you want to try and hit the sweet spot as much as possible, because that's like the middle of the racket, and that will give you like kind of like the best shot quality. But as you get more advanced and are feeling more confident with your technique and your strokes, you have the chance to try one of the rackets that have a bit of a smaller sweet spot, because even though it's smaller, it will give you a bit more power and a bit more accuracy. And so that's the benefit of having a smaller sweet spot.
That totally makes sense. So if someone was looking at both of these things and trying to buy a racket, and they were like a fresh beginner, and they came up to you and said, well, I found this one at Sportchek, but it was $50, but I also found this one at like Wal-Mart, and I can get 3 of them for like $20, what kind of suggestion would you give them in terms of if they said, which one do you think I should get? I guess this mostly addresses the differences in terms of like a cheaper racket versus like a more expensive racket, and if the quality is actually worth that extra price.
I'd say it's all up to first your preference, and then maybe secondly is how often you're playing. Because I think that most people started with like more of a cheaper racket just to see first if they like badminton, and that if they think it's worth investing the money, right? But I think that if you're going to be playing often, if you are trying to get better, then it's worth investing a bit more on your racket, because at least for me, when I was starting out, the racket made a big difference, whether it was a Wal-Mart racket compared to like a more high-end racket. So I think it depends like what your budget is, and then how frequent you're going to want to be playing badminton.
I think that's totally fair. Oh, there's something I also forgot to kind of ask you guys in terms of rackets as well. I know that for some people, they might kind of ask this question as well in terms of like talking about grips and whatnot and having the different kind of grip sizes. So what are like the different grip sizes, and what are the differences between them when they're choosing to buy one?
One thing about grips is that when you're starting, it doesn't really matter that much, because because most of the time the way you play has to do with your technique and not necessarily your grip. But if we're talking about the differences between like the numbers that are associated with the grips, like G5, G4, G6, I think the bigger number you go, the smaller the grip size will be. But I'm not sure if this is true for all the brands. I'm just talking about like the big 3, so Victor, Yonex, and Li Ning. I know that this is true. I know in the past they used to actually use different naming. So like, say you bought a Li Ning racket, it might be like AB, or like some random sort of naming scheme that doesn't really make sense. But now everyone sort of moved to the G6 and G5, like the G naming scheme. So it's easier to differentiate between the grips. But I'd say just try around. Some people like big grips, some people like smaller grips. A good rule of thumb is that if you have bigger hands, you'll tend to like the bigger grips more, and if you have smaller hands, you'll like the smaller grips more.
And grips, in terms of rackets, is one of the most forgiving things. Like the weight of the racket, you cannot really change, other than if you do like putting tape on the head and stuff. But grips, if you get a too thin grip that you find you eventually don't really like, you can put over grips on top to make it even thicker. So you're not set into whatever like G5 grip that you got. You can always make it thicker with more grips on top.
So is that the primary purpose of grips, just to kind of add the extra thickness?
The first grip that you put on is for comfort, I'd say, because you don't want to be gripping the wood, especially if you took your undergrip off. But other than that, if you do start to put pro wrap under and then grips on top of that, that I would say is purposely to change the thickness of your grip.
I was going to say, I've seen people with a lot of grip on their rackets, and so, you know, you get to playing around, and the grip is like one of the most variable things I've seen.
Totally fair. I think the other thing that has a lot of variation to it that you can change is stringing as well. And this was actually one of the questions I found that somebody submitted into our podcast forum. So what does it mean, like, for string tension? Like, if somebody says, oh, can I get 23 pounds? Like, what does it mean? And if it matters in terms of, like, how you play?
Ooh, that's a big topic there, Shirley.
Yeah.
Stringing is a can of worms by itself. You have a whole podcast dedicated to stringing.
Ooh, but like, what are some some general things? So like, I guess as you go up in stringing tension, what does that entail?
I think for people starting who don't really know much about strings, they should definitely go for the more durable and probably the thicker strings. Because as you said, the longer people play, eventually they'll try and go for a lot of the higher tensions and the thinner strings. Because generally, those give you more control. And if you are really good, it can also give you more power, which combined with the higher tensions and the thinner strings gives you a much higher chance of snapping your strings much more often. So for people starting out, I would definitely say go for mid tensions, maybe around 24, 25 pounds, and also go for thicker strings like BG65, TIs, strings like that.
One little bit of context I'd like to add is me and Jonas are actually stringers. So we string our own rackets and rackets for other people. And I think, John, you actually know how to string too, right?
Yeah, I do know how to string, but my coach strings for me. I break my strings at least once a week, and I'm still a student, so I don't have that much time to string. So I'm fine with paying people to string for me, unfortunately.
Yeah, one thing I'd like to add to what Jonas said about string tensions and stuff is a lot of people tend to think that the more you play or the better you are, the higher tension you should go and the more benefit that'll be. That's not always true. You tend to find that the more people play and the higher level player they are, they will use higher tensions and thinner strings. But even some of the pros, they don't go as high as you think. I know a one player, if anybody knows Akane Yamaguchi, she actually plays at 24 pounds. And she used to be world number 1. So,
wow.
Yeah, high tension is not necessarily a good thing. You know, just see what you like, but don't always just listen to people saying that, oh, if you're playing at this level or you hit this hard, then you should be using this type of tension and this type of string.
And contrary to common belief, you cannot string rackets by hand. That is not true.
Don't ever, anybody who tells you that, don't be friends with them. Just leave. Just turn around, walk away. You don't know them anymore.
They don't know what they're talking about. That's very interesting. I didn't know that that she played at a lower tension. John, you played a high level too. Do you have anything to add on to this for context at all?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say that most of the players who are playing at a high level, they tend to string high. And then the benefit of that is that when they're playing, they find that their shots are more accurate and more sharp, string at that higher tension. But the benefit of kind of going with like a lower tension when you're first starting out is the string will kind of act as like a trampoline, which will help you get more power and just help have the shot go over the net more often if the technique isn't there. But I think as you slowly get better and better, that you should slowly try to increase your string tension. But with string, kind of like with grip and with rackets as well, it's all about your preference and then your comfort level.
To kind of swing it back over, I know you brought up something really interesting before, Daniel, about sweet spot and in terms of stringing.
One thing about string tension and sweet spot is that the higher tensions you go, the smaller the sweet spot will be. So if you notice the really good guys, they play at a higher tension and they always hit the sweet spot because they're so practiced that they always hit that specific spot on the racket. But if you're more of a beginner and you tend to be more inconsistent with your technique and your swing, then you'll find that you're hitting all over the racket and not necessarily always in the sweet spot.
But the thing about a smaller sweet spot and higher tension, that sounds on paper like a bad thing, but it's actually a trade-off because the sweet spot area gets smaller, but the quality of the sweet spot gets bigger. That's better.
Totally fair. So correct me if I'm wrong. In my head, I'm imagining that as you play over time, and the strings get a little bit weaker from like hitting all the time, it gets looser, and that means your sweet spot gets, I get bigger, or like it just changes, and it might affect how like your playing style. What are your thoughts on just restringing? Like, would you suggest people only restring once their rackets are broken, or is it like okay too to kind of like, if you feel like it's not working for you anymore, to just kind of like cut them and then get them restrung?
I think you should look at the fraying on your strings at that point. If you look at the middle of your racket and you can see like the strings are almost half frayed even, I think it is justifiable to get new strings at that point. Because if it's lasted that long, chances are also that your strings have been strung at such a low tension that it would be quite a long time until they finally snap.
Okay. So if somebody was a beginner and they did go for one of like the thicker strings and kind of like a mid, like lower tension, what would you say the life expectancy, I guess, of those strings would be in terms of consistent play? Like, when should they start kind of looking at whether or not they should switch strings, even if it wasn't fully fraying yet?
One thing I recommend, if I was stringing for somebody, is that especially if you're a beginner and you're using one of the thicker strings, the performance tends to be not as good as some of the other strings, and the feeling of the string is not quite there. So if they were a beginner and they're using the thicker string, I would say to go as long as you can without stringing. If you're a beginner and using the thicker string, the main goal of using the thicker string is durability. So you want to stretch your stringing as long as you can, and just keep going until it breaks. And when it breaks, then maybe restring it again, and you can use higher tensions if you like, or maybe you're at the point where you're ready to use a different string. But say if you're a beginner, just try and use that string for as long as you can, because I know depending on where you are, if you go to like the more expensive places to string, string can cost up to like $30, $35 just to get a restring. This is if you're going to the pro shops. I know if you go to like Jonas or me, then the prices will be lower because we're not a store.
No taxes.
So and I think if in terms of restringing, even for the higher level players, cost tends to be a big factor, because even if you're paying less for like a friend who's restringing rackets, it's still money. It's not always cheap to just restring all the time.
Another benefit of sticking with your first few strings until they break is that you gain a level of consistency. If you're always snapping and you're always restringing, you might be trying out new strings, new tensions all the time. And so the consistency doesn't really become something that you can rely on. Since you're always using new strings, it's new shots, new powers.